Good evening, everybody, and welcome. The spokesman in me wants to say be sure to turn off your cell phones or your mobiles, especially those of you who expect to do business. Of course, I won't do that myself. Well, good evening and welcome. This is going to be a short introduction, since I believe that only Paul, the author, that is, can do justice to this minefield of a novel, tantalizingly and appropriately titled The Book of Paul. Our bewildered and bewildering narrator, the primary Paul of the two novelized Pauls, escorts us, a tad manipulatively one sometimes thinks, involuntarily at times, through a menace of closed rooms and gloomy corridors in the sequestered dwelling to which he has moved or been moved to by his wealthy patron. When last met in the initial novel of People and Things, Paul was beset and upset by the unwanted incursions of various intruders, eager and anxious to enlist his help and our sympathy in resolving their uncertain affairs or directing his. Then he lived in a hovel, alone, seemingly content in his isolated subsistence, not wishing to be bothered, making little, if any, effort to understand or grasp the world spinning dizzily, annoyingly even, around his indifferent equilibrium. And now, in this sequel, we are back among many of the same characters, often irritating, needy, knowingly enigmatic, mysterious as ever. Intruding, it seems, at will, startling and surprising Paul when he stumbles upon them or is boldly disturbed by them. There's the cleaning woman, Marina, supposed to appear on Fridays. She keeps popping up regardless of the day of the week. There's Cass, the questionably benevolent patron's ex. She hovers her availability, it seems, close to the narrator Paul, while insistently declaring that she is preparing to clear out and move away, which indeed she does. Then, shades of Alby's play Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, there's George and Martha, the former ingratiatingly solicitous, the latter a volatile bully. Are they husband and wife, or brother and sister, contracted caretakers or custodians, thuggish cons? We must wait and see. And what about the mysterious woman and the sinister quest that results in the abduction of the redoubtable investigator, Mr. Samuels, who Paul hotly wishes were not called Mr. Samuels because of the hell to pay with the possessive apostrophe. Mr. Samuels is a story and predicament that runs parallel to the maze-like musings of housebound Paul, who ponders, where do you wander, Mr. Samuels? And what do you wonder, Mr. Samuels? Despite all the indignities and tribulations he is forced to endure, Mr. Samuels stoically pursues his business with the professional dedication of a resolute Poirot, phrasing his remarks and choosing his words with purse-lipped precision and care, as though doffing his hat politely as prelude to the sentences being formulated. Meanwhile, from up in the hills where he has retreated with his new lover, the dubiously motivated patron, Paul, having installed narrator Paul in his former mansion, manages to remain a distanced influence on the events unfolding in his old home. Paul, the narrator, is debating change, a slow, unremarkable metamorphosis he is undergoing that suggests that things that once were of no consequence to him are, disturbingly, becoming things of consequence. Taken aback at his concern for Marina the cleaner, who has been threatened with dismissal by George, the ostensible caretaker, an appalled Paul asks himself, must he do something with everyone who crosses his path? If I ever go back out into the world, will every shopkeeper, pedestrian, barber, and shopper need my intervention? A nudge, a push, or a shove? He wonders. Mr. Samuels has a rendezvous with the mysterious woman. She has been following him as he goes about an investigation. An unknown stranger stabs the unfortunate detective as he waits to meet the lady at an art gallery. When Samuels eventually regains consciousness, he finds himself, wounds bandaged, his penis in a catheter, confined to bed in a house somewhere in the country. He worries that his son is okay, but is reassured by the mysterious woman who appears by his side. The boy is safe and secure, she says. As to the stabbing and his removal to the countryside house, she offers no details. Paul has ventured outside his house into the garden, where he contemplates the pigeons, noting that their wings creak as they fly. He presciently observes that not being an expert on something is no barrier to banging on about it. In fact, he concludes, the more expert that someone is, the less likely, it seems to me, that they are to bang on about it. Whereas he, having no expertise whatever, is free to say anything I like, if only to myself. George, meanwhile, presses a puppy on Paul in lieu of the goat he had requested, believing the goat would keep the garden trim. Later, he comes across a letter from Cass that George had left out. She is overseas with her spirit guide, who is urging her to rid herself of all her ties. Proclaiming the sole of the foot and not the eye to be the mirror of the soul, she lets it be known that she is learning to master the art of the toe wriggle. Moreover, she says, she has no plans to return, and she signs off saying, trust your feet and step into the truth. Cassandra Podia. Mr. Samuels makes a break for freedom from the house in the country where he has been held as he recuperated. He manages to elude capture for a few nights before being brought back and sedated anew. He dreams of his father and a trip they made to a mountain summit when he was in his teens. The father asks his son if he knows why he is there. The boy offers a series of tentative answers. For the view? For the exercise? To reconnoiter? Each time, his father reacts with derision. The boy is forced to admit that he doesn't know why he is there. An exchange that is almost pure theatre follows, Beckettian in its bleakness. You don't know why you are here, and yet you are here, the father says. Because you said we would go for a hike, Father. So, you are here for no other reason than blind obedience, the father retorts. Meekly, the boy says, he's sure the father has a good reason for them being there. Now we have it, comes the answer. You are here because you trust me. You follow me all the way up here in the glaring sun because you reason that I must have a reason. Ours not to reason why. Reason from an insecure premise is as bad, worse perhaps, than not applying reason at all. You reason that you are here for a reason because you trust. You trust me, and so you trust that I have a reason. But that is where you fall down, at the first hurdle. You have built your house on sand, my boy. Trusting is not knowing. Is this why his father brought him there? The boy asked, elucidating further. You have just explained to me trust is not knowing, and that when I trusted you, I was perhaps wrong to do so. That I was wrong, rather, to reason that you had a reason based on my trust in you. But was not your reason to bring me here to tell me about trust and knowledge? So I was right to trust that you had a reason because you did have a reason. He asks the father for some water from the bottle he is carrying and is refused. Should have brought your own. Never go anywhere without knowing what you are doing, why you are doing it, and what you will need. Before the father sets off, having told the boy to meet him where the car had been parked some hours further down the mountainside, or that otherwise he would have to make his own way home, his parting shot to his son is yet another chilling admonition. It is customary on such occasions to wish someone luck. I do not wish you luck. Luck is not to be trusted. It is a chimera. If it is anything, luck is merely preparation meeting circumstances. Nothing more. Look to yourself, my boy, and yourself alone. As you are all doubtless aware, Paul is the AAA of the accomplished, author, actor, and academic. His namesake narrator, amidst all the intrusion confusion and his futile efforts to remain disengaged, obsessively dissects and parses the banal exchanges coming his way that serve as everyday discourse. He is fascinated by the intimacy avoidance of those keep you at arm's length cliches of social distancing. He blurts them out, then retrieves them in order to re-examine what he said or what was said to him. He repeatedly turns sentences over and inside out, testing their metal, as it were, against his teeth, rolling their flavor about on his palate. As you read, pause to savor the play of words. Think of the dialogue playing on stage or read on radio. Most of all, think what's resonating in your head. Trust me, that's the best way of knowing the book of Paul. Thank you. I now call Paul to the stage. He will read some excerpts from the novel and will happily take your questions thereafter.
Thank you, Brian, for that wonderful evocation of what I appear to have been doing. I'm just going to read a few sections. I don't want to... normally I read these sort of sequentially, first chapter, second chapter sort of thing, but it doesn't really work with this novel because, as Brian intimated, there's two sort of parallel things going on here. That there's the events of Paul's actual life in this mansion that he's been gifted in some sort of way, and then his imaginings of what Mr. Samuels, the private detective, might be up to or not. So I'll start off from chapter 1 and just give you a sense of a little bits and bobs as we go through. Thank you all for being here, and I'm very appreciative of you coming out on such a dreich evening. I should have used the word dreich at some stage in the novel, actually, because it's a very excellent word and should get out more. I'm trying to think what my favourite word of the novel is now. I'm sure there's probably a whole chapter in there that's just so I can use a particular word. Anyway, this is from chapter 1. The narrator is Paul. So I live by proxy. I send my man out and he reports back. This is not true. My man is not my man, and nor do I send him out. I wouldn't know where to send him out to, in truth. But I get bulletins from the front, dispatches brought to my bunker. He sits with me here from time to time, and he tells me things of what goes on in the world, that portion of the world with which he comes into contact. For although his range is broader than mine, I know it's narrower than some. So I get a slice of life, as the phrase used to be. His reports are very dull. He sits opposite me on the other side of his desk, takes out his notebook from his inside jacket pocket, and gives me the particulars, as he likes to call them. The particulars go something like this. 17th August, weather as previously. Proceeded by car to the vicinity of target, reached 10:17. Target as described previously in location, previously ascertained. Delivered package as instructed. Returned to and briefed client. Client satisfied. It varies from time to time. He might go by scooter or on foot rather than by car, for example. He might not deliver a package but merely follow the target for some little time. The weather never varies, nor the client's satisfaction. It has always been clients and never clients. An oddity, perhaps. The date changes too, obviously. Perhaps it's always been clients' satisfaction and never clients because he prefers to work for one individual. Or perhaps individuals only ever seek him out as if one person alone recognise another loner and trusts him on that basis alone. These things could be cleared up, I'm sure, if I were to ask. I could merely say, Mr. Samuels, do you only ever work for individuals, and is that your own choice, or a matter of circumstance and coincidence? That is far too complicated a question. I would have to rephrase it or create a series of questions that could only be answered yes or no. But for that to happen, we would have to talk. And we do not talk in the sense of have a conversation, if my memory of what a conversation might be still holds true. My dear man, good morning. Are you well? I am very well, thank you for asking. And you? Oh, you know. No, my dear man, I do not know. The same niggle in the knee. Oh, I am so sorry. Have you not applied that new unguent I recommended? I have, but with some little success. Well, I am flabbergasted. But why? I was assured that the unguent would cure all knee-related complaints. I myself have benefited from it greatly. And yet I have not. And yet you have not. Curious. Most strange. Odd. Odd indeed. Will you take a seat? I will, thank you. If nothing else than to relieve the niggle in your knee. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. That sort of thing. That is the sort of thing we do not do to avoid confusion. Instead, Mr. Samuels ploughs through his notes with his customary monotone, his notebook open before him, although he knows it all by heart. When he finishes, he places the notebook back in the breast pocket of his brown suit and adopts an attitude as if open for questions. I might have that wrong. He adopts an attitude, but what it means, I'm not sure. He does the following. Rests back in his chair an inch or two, inhales, exhales, then crosses his leg right over left. And might I add that he crosses his legs properly. He does not rest his ankle on his knee, spreading open his crotch area for all to see. No, the cup of the right knee sits snugly on the left, and the right foot threatens for a moment to tuck itself behind the left calf before declining to do so. Crotch and environs safely stowed. I don't ask any questions, save one. Were you satisfied? Within the parameters of the case, I can say that I was satisfied, he would say. We would sit on a while, he on his side of the desk, me on mine, and consider satisfaction with some satisfaction. Then he would leave. He's not been here for a long time. How long, I'm not sure. When Cass left, he seemed to also, after a polite period to save face, I suppose. So even my limited window on the world has been shut or pulled to. Where do you wander, Mr. Samuels? And what, Mr. Samuels, do you wonder? I'll just pick it up a bit further on. Paul has been alone in the house since Cass went off on her spiritual journey. He's been used to being alone, and then suddenly he gets this intrusion of various people into his space. So this is picking up on that idea from chapter 3. Yet there must be people, it seems. You can't get by without them. People have tried, I know. Where are they now, those people who took themselves off to the desert or shoved themselves up a column to be far from man and closer to God? Now there's a little bit of knowledge I have retained over the years, the fact that there were such people. I've no idea why I have hung on to it, and even less of an idea as to whether holding on to it has done me any good. Still less what it says about me, if anything. I've also retained the fact that all the continents were once one big landmass, everything jammed together, surrounded by a broiling sea. I've also retained the fact that necessary is one C and two S's. And the reason for that is this: I can still hear a little rhyme in my head. N-E-C-E, sus, Ari. I don't know where this little gobbet of inner noise comes from, but there you go, I've always had it, rattling away in the mansions of my mind until it's called upon and I hack it up. Like an owl gobs up a ball of fur and bones. They come with the house. That's how I reason it out, for they don't come with me. I became aware of them only after Cass had left. She must have dealt with them beforehand, saying perhaps, "Let the poor chap alone, let him get used to things first." Ever the optimist. So maybe they came with her rather than the house, but when she left they remained, so the house was the prime mover in all of this after all. Otherwise, why didn't they shuffle off with her when she bolted for pastures new? But just to be clear, although God knows why, the people are not of the house, but somehow attached to it. That could be clearer, but never mind. The things of the house demand there be people. Yes, it's the things that demand the people and not the people the things. That seems to be the way of it. I have no need of the people, and yet they are there from time to time, so it's the things that are to blame. "My friend," said the man I'd never seen before. He threw open his arms as if I was meant to rush into his embrace. I didn't, for the obvious reason, but also for the less obvious reason that by throwing open his arms, the man had revealed large sweat stains in his pits. This was in the kitchen. I made sure the island counter was between the two of us. The kitchen seemed a lot smaller with him in it. "There you are," which was undeniable. "I've been told all about you, so you don't worry." I worried. "I'm sorry," he said. "I am George. You'll have heard of me." I hadn't. Mrs. Johnson didn't say anything. She hadn't. "Never mind," he said. But it looked like he minded. His open face shrank into itself a little, just for a moment. When I say open, I mean it looked like he had been hit by a shovel. His nose sprawled across his face, and his mouth seemed far too big. I now realise why. The nose being flat to the face, or thereabouts, meant that he had to breathe through his mouth, so the mouth was perpetually open, and never more so than when at rest. When not talking, he exuded snuffling sounds. Breathing, I assume. Let's get it over with. We've done the face, we might as well do the rest. His hair was undecided. Where there was any, it was thick and black. Bits of it were then scraped over the top of his head. In fact, the top of his head was the least hairy bit of him. His eyebrows were bushy and his ears sprouted thick tufts. From the top of his open shirt, a verge of dark material swarmed and glistened with sweat. If I had seen his back, which I did not nor hope ever to see, it too would have been thickly matted in dank hair. In this climate too. I should have pitied him, but I didn't. No doubt hair swathed his stomach, although at a stretch, for it was very large and hung over his belt. I assumed the belt, it couldn't be seen. His legs were short and bowed. His feet were large and splayed. Now all this is very miraculous. To have seen so much and remembered so much. Are my powers increasing? I mean, those of observation and recall. Perhaps. But perhaps also George was of a slight build, to the point of being wispy, with luxurious blonde hair swept back in dramatic fashion, with a pinched face, sharp nose, slight freckles, and unsettlingly blue eyes. Perhaps he had a dainty foot, shod in patent leather. Doesn't matter, strange man in the kitchen calling me friend, that is what matters. There was a silence for some time. There'd been a silence on my part throughout, to be fair, so now this George man was joining in. He didn't like it. I'm here to help, he said. I said nothing. Whatever needs to be done. His eyes cast about him, looking for things that needed to be done. Nothing that I could see. Yes, a small sign saying fridge, where the fridge was, might have been a help. But if I was that bothered, I could have done it myself. Little things, or big things. He demonstrated the meaning of his words by bringing his thumb and forefinger into the closest possible proximity before squinting at them, and then throwing his arms wide with such force that I feared the buttons of his shirt would burst. It was then I confirmed my suspicions about his stomach. Outside, he gestured, or in. I took this to mean outside as far as the boundaries of the property, for outside is an awfully big thing to be responsible for if not. Similarly, I took in to mean between the walls of the house, and definitely not any spurious depths, his or mine. The pool, he said. You'll need a man to do the pool. I had no idea that a pool came with a man attached. My cousin, he's a great pool man. I can have a word and it'll all be sorted. Leave it. Leave the pool? Yes. I could see he was struggling with the concept of leave. Leave it to nature. Nature was here the conceptual difficulty. You mean do nothing with it? To it? Yes. But it will stink. Then it will stink. He shook his head and sighed. Poor man. Perhaps he had promised his cousin a nice little earner, or perhaps the thought of a pool going to rack and ruin disturbed him. You'll need a gardener, he said. My cousin, he's a good man. He could come and do the garden. Now, a garden and a pool are two completely different kettle of fish, in my mind. I've never had a pool and have a general dread of water, whereas I have had a little patch of dirt that I called a garden in the past, and I've been quite fond of it, if I remember correctly. The garden that surrounded the house was very far from being a patch of dirt. There were fruit trees of various sorts, lots of palms and succulents and whatnot. I'm not a horticulturalist. But most of all, there was a lot of grass, and I knew, given time, that once pristine lawn would become more of a mess of undergrowth and weeds and invasive species of all kinds. I pondered. The invasive species, so called, would no doubt just have been indigenous species that weren't wanted, the ugly ones, in effect, or the troublesome ones. There was good reason, I had to concede, for a man to come every now and then to do battle with all this. But was not I a man? Could not I do battle with it just as well? Obviously, not as well as someone more practiced, but well enough when all's said and done. When will that day come? The day when all is said and done. Each day means more to be said and more to be done. The more saying, because there is more to do, the more doing, just in order to say more. That doesn't quite work. Saying and doing and saying, it doesn't matter which way around. They have some sort of connection that is beyond me at the moment. I would like a goat, please, I said. A goat? Yes, a goat. A goat. I was not aware there were any other kinds, but there you go. For the garden, I said. His already wide face widened still further. To eat the grass, the weeds, I was growing expansive. He sighed again and shifted his weight from side to side. He even stuck out his tongue, a little better to concentrate. So, my friend, you do not want a gardener, but you want a goat. I nodded. He nodded back, then puffed out his cheeks, exhaled, and let his lips ripple. A goat? Well, well. He got a large mobile telephone from the back pocket of his trousers, at least I hope it was from there, and consulted it at length, dabbing and swiping at it from time to time. I don't know, he said. Men I can do, but goats? It wasn't an honest laugh, but it was passable. He kept repeating the word goat over and over again as he stared at his phone, rubbing the back of his neck with his free hand when the need arose, flicking at the phone screen with his thumb. Lord knows what he was doing, but it seemed to be a necessary process. Nailed it once again. I let him get on with it. It may have been a necessary process, but it was not a successful one. He gave up after some little time and merely said that he would see what he could do. Goat, that's a new one. He threw up his hands, the better to laugh. So, that's me with a job to do, isn't it? It was. I hadn't meant to give him a job at all, but he said he was there to help, and so I'd asked him to help. It might not have been the sort of help he had wanted to give, but it was the sort of help I needed. I thought that our interview was at an end, but I was wrong. He now introduced a silence. Yes, the silence definitely came from him, and as we stood there in the kitchen, I eventually understood that the silence was designed to get me to recant. To say, my dearest chap, the goat? What was I thinking? No, of course. I must have a gardener, and your cousin sounds like the very man. But I held my peace and let the silence gather until it proved too much for him. Well, he threw up his hands again. I best be off. Got to get a goat. He was on the verge of exiting the room when he stopped, turned, and said, of course, Marina will be in on Friday as usual for the usual. And he was gone. Of all this, only the word Friday made any immediate sense. It would have made more sense if I had then known what day of the week it actually was, but there you go, I did not. And finally, just one small piece, which is, this comes after, as Brian mentioned, Mr. Samuels is followed when he takes his boy to school by this mysterious woman who seems as expert in the ways of private detection as Mr. Samuels. So this is Paul trying to imagine how this is processed by Mr. Samuels' mind. To say that Mr. Samuels was discombobulated by the encounter would be false. He stored it away in his mind for future clarification. I'd like to think of the mind of Mr. Samuels as a sphere, perfect in its way, yet not so perfect as to not allow the occasional addition to whatever means one might imagine. But I can't. No, the sphere of mind, or mind as sphere, I don't know, will not do justice to the man. So let us think of his mind as an office, albeit a well-run office, overseen by some faceless manager who has a cubicle all to themselves. Themselves, honestly. I don't know, man, woman, it doesn't matter. What matters is that this person is entombed in a glass-walled cubicle from 9 to 5. From there, the entire office is open to the view, with a little twisting, admittedly, a little wheeling about on a well-oiled chair mounted on casters. 9 to 5 doesn't work. Never mind. Anyway, the manager overlooks this well-run office and sees neatly arranged desks and chairs and the necessary employees sat at them doing their jobs, checking documents, cross-referencing one piece of paper against another piece of paper, making notes on a further piece of paper, and then storing this third piece of paper in a small filing cabinet to the right of the desk before returning pieces of paper 1 and 2 into 2 separate small filing cabinets on the left of the desk. A man, and it is a man, pushes a trolley laden with documents up and down the aisles, distributing new documents to left and right to be checked, cross-referenced and stored. When the time comes, and come it does on occasion, another man strides the same aisles, goes straight to the correct desk and secures a piece of paper from the cabinet on the right-hand side of the desk. No words are exchanged. He does not say, "Morning, Janice, how is Bert these days?" And Janice does not say, "Oh, same old, same old." And he doesn't say, "Still, mustn't grumble." And she doesn't say, "Try telling Bert that." And he doesn't say, "Ha ha, document 24A/06/1971. And she doesn't say, "Here you go, love, all the best to Bernice." No. Both know which document is required and it's duly handed over. Such is the mind of Mr. Samuels, until it is not. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Rosie.
You're from gentle A, of the academic side, not the acting or the authorship one. Excuse me if I don't get up. I was wondering, Paul, if we agree that writing is just as much about learning knowledge as reading is. I'm referring to chapter 13, okay? Tell me
What happens in chapter 13?
Check it, I don't know, you wrote it.
I don't remember which chapter does what.
Tell us, please, what did you learn in the process of writing and finishing the book, of course, that you didn't know before about yourself?
Oh, that's really
about the
interesting.
writing itself.
Wow.
The second question, because since I'm first, I can use two questions. The second one is quite theoretical as well. What are the dangers that readers potentially have to expect in reading the book? I mean, readers who are not prepared, readers who do not know your sense of humor, readers who probably do not have the academic background and so on.
Okay.
What is ahead with that?
I'll take that second question first. Yeah, humour is an odd one. I think my humour is very English.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's got that slight. No, actually, that's probably not true. It's probably more Irish than English in some ways, more sort of Flann O'Brien sort of area of things. Although I'm not. But yes, I mean the humour is something that's a necessary part of it, because the world is bizarre. It is. I mean, if you just, when you get up tomorrow morning, when you're just going through your day, just think about how odd most of that day is as you get out your weird little brick and that's screeching at you in the morning to wake up, and flick through it and then get a message from somebody who lives on the other side of the world. And that's your phone, and that's fine. And that's normal. And that I find, things like that I find very odd. So it's reimagining or rethinking those things that we find normal. I think the challenges as well are not feeling certain. I think if you want a novel that will take your hand and walk you through the necessary steps, then this is not that sort of novel. It worries about each step that it makes, and very often retraces its steps. So it's as much about the telling of stories, even when you're trying to make sense of your daily existence. You're doing that through telling stories in some sort of way, even to yourself, which need to be revised and revisioned and then abandoned in some ways very often. So what did I learn? What does happen in chapter 13? I really don't.
The second paragraph is about knowledge.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Well, I was feeling quite profound that day. I was like.
It's profound. No, basically what did you learn about yourself in the process?
In the process of writing.
Of this one, because you have background already.
Yeah, this one I think I learnt more how the mind is this weird, inexhaustible and yet also repetitious thing. So that'll take you down blind alleys, and I like blind alleys. I mean, blind alleys I find quite useful things to go down every now and again. Not all of them are in the book by any means, but sort of feeling your way almost in parallel to your own mind. God, that sounds pretentious. But having that sort of split sensibility is something that I found quite intriguing. But I am pretentious, it's my job. I teach literary theory, that's what I do for a living. So yeah, but the novel is very worried about how does one get knowledge and retain knowledge and how knowledge functions, and how reliable it is. Yeah, so there's lots of that. Also, I learned that lots of tidbits of popular culture just float into you. There's a few, like at one point I worry about whether or not sweating is possible, and impossible rather. Like Prince Andrew. It must have been the time. I mean, looking back at it now, I don't know, but it must have been at the time when that whole Prince Andrew thing was happening. So I worry about sweat for a bit. And there's a phrase. I think at least once I used the phrase "dither and delay." Favourite of Boris, and the goat is named Boris. The randy goat, not the nice goat that he doesn't get. The randy goat that plagues the world. He's called Boris. So yeah. Any other questions? Oh, Kate. Hello.
I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway.
Yeah.
Were you aware of thinking about Paul the narrator in terms of neurodivergence at all, or being different in that?
I mean, neurodivergence as a term is a really odd one, isn't it? It smacks of actual clinical diagnosis, and I wouldn't do that with Paul. I mean, I don't feel qualified to say how divergent he is. He is, but then the world's pretty divergent.
Were you thinking about him at all in those terms? Do you think? Or
No, I don't think so. I think he is who he is, and whether or not, and so his only measure is himself. So it kind of doesn't play into it. So you don't really know how because they're all pretty bizarre. All the characters in the novel are quite odd in their own little ways. And I guess you could argue that Mr. Samuels is, on that basis, sort of neurodivergent. He's very dull and very straight and very attention to detail. So yeah, there are none of the characters are and Cassandra is probably not neurodivergent, but is part of those eccentricities that people go in for. I mean, people do go off to the South Sea Islands and listen to how to plug in their feet to the ground. I mean, that's not an unusual thing that people do. So yeah, people are unusual, I think. Unfortunately. Yeah, Penny.
Paul,
Mm-hmm.
you talk about Paul in the third person, but is a lot of it autobiographical?
No.
No. But there must be
very
some.
sorry for you. I feel very sorry for me if it was. For us.
I haven't read the book yet.
No. No, it's not. I mean, there are little tidbits that are. I mean, the NECE Ari thing is something I remember from Mrs. Brocklehurst when I was about 8 at school. So there's little sort of threads like that. But I don't live in a mansion. I do get on with people reasonably well. I have. I have raised a family. I do have animals. He doesn't know what to do with a dog. I don't have a goat, no. But then neither does Paul, so maybe that is autobiographical. We are both goatless. No, I mean, there's inevitably turns of phrase as well, which are embedded in how I speak, I think. But I've tried to. But there's Paul has his own rhythm, I think. I don't think I speak in a way that is recognisably his, and he doesn't either, because he writes. He doesn't speak very much. He writes a lot.
Why do you think you called him Paul?
There's a few reasons for that. I'm intrigued by the whole by St. Paul, by that idea of transformation from Saul to Paul. The whole road to Damascus thing, and St. Paul just intrigues me anyway as a figure. I'm really bad at names in novels. Or most of my novels' names, they're biblical because I can't think of anything else. So in my first novel, Now Then, he was called John Matthews, the lead character. So that's 2 out of the Gospels done, and then I was a bit stuck. And then with things like I just like one of the reasons why I did do it, and this is kind of vaguely autobiographical. When I was in a band, when I was between the ages of about 16 and 19, there were 4 of us in the band, and 3 of us were called Paul. So these weird things happen. And I don't dislike the name. I feel detached. Yeah, I feel detached from it anyway. I feel detached from it. But there is something going on with apart from Cassandra, there is something going on with the female names in the book. So you have to look out for that. Joe.
Have you taken consideration how people could see it as a sort of autobiographical thing?
Oh yeah, I'm happy with that.
Part of the joke,
it is part of the joke. Yeah, it is part of the joke. Yeah, there's a wonderful, and also I guess I was slightly inspired by Will Self, his novel The Book of Dave, which is fantastic. It's a fantastic book, which I highly recommend. So that sort of was in my mind as well, I think. And that's very similar in some. Actually, the more I think about it, the more similar it is. That involves a taxi driver trying to figure his life out, and he sort of writes things down, and then in the future this book gets discovered, or fragments of this book get discovered, and it becomes the new Bible of the new world, and it's all just based on this taxi driver ranting and raving about things going to hell in a handbasket. It's a fantastic novel, it really is. So yeah, it is playing around with that sort of whole autobiographical thing. Very much. Yeah. Anything else? Right, thank you all very much for coming. Please avail yourself of A, a book, and B, a glass of wine. I'm very happy to sign, and I'll just be right outside to do that. Thank you very much for coming on a brief note.